Welcome to the video on the shift from teaching to learning. In this video, I would like to give you some insight into a development that has been discussed in the field of education since the 1990s, and that is the so-called shift from teaching to learning. The process of shifting our understanding of educational processes from a focus on teaching and the teacher to an understanding which is more focused on the students and their learning processes forms the background for how we design study programs and teaching methods today. And globalization seems to play an important role here. But what does globalization have to do with teaching and learning? In the globalized world, like the one we are living in today, societies are facing some challenges. On the one hand, we can observe a constant growth of information in our modern world because new knowledge is produced every second. And this information, additionally, is available much faster and to much more people through the internet. On the other hand, we see that this new knowledge becomes outdated faster. Research results that are groundbreaking discoveries today might be an old hat tomorrow. And many nations around the globe have been moving, or are moving now, from industrial societies to knowledge-based societies. A knowledge-based society refers to that type of society that is needed in order to be able to compete in the changing economic and political dynamics of the modern world. It refers to societies that are well educated and which therefore rely on the knowledge of their citizens to drive the innovation, entrepreneurship, and dynamism of that society's economy. Going along with this, we also see changes in working life. We are moving from highly specialized and well-structured working environments to more dynamic ones. Today we find more and more project-based teams that are characterized by a broad range of diversified and ever new tasks. And at the same time, we see that these diversified and changing tasks require ever more detailed specialist knowledge. In former time, an engineer was an engineer was an engineer. Today, our societies need chemical engineers, technical engineers, mechanical engineers, and so on and so forth. And institutions of higher education need to adapt to these dynamic changes in society and economy, since knowledge and science are the most important resources of modern societies. Thus, for study programs, this requires a paradigm shift from teacher-oriented input to the outcome of a learning process. What does that mean? It means that we have to supplement the canonical knowledge by metacognitive strategies and procedural knowledge. We have to incorporate lifelong learning as a strategy into our study programs. And we have to give access to more and more diversified students in our higher education institutions. In a nutshell, the labor markets in our knowledge-based societies need graduates who can use metacognitive strategies and procedural knowledge that enables them to identify, to select, and to evaluate relevant information in order to accomplish a task or to solve a problem. We need to teach them how to learn lifelong. In 1995, Robert Barr and John Tagg published an article in the magazine Change with the title, "From Teaching to Learning, a New Paradigm for Undergraduate Education." Barr and Tagg both worked at Paloma College in San Marcos, California, and Barr was the Director of Institutional Research and Planning, and Tagg was an Associate Professor of English. And they have been on a mission in the late 1990s. They, amongst other authors at that time, wanted to promote a constructivist approach to learning. They claimed that up to this day, American colleges have been there to provide instruction, but that a paradigm shift had started at that time, which included to now see colleges as institutions that produce learning. I would like to cite the Change article. There it reads, we now see that our mission is not instruction, but rather that of producing learning with every student by whatever means work best. This text can be seen as a primary source for the discussion about shifting the notion of educational processes from teaching to learning. But remember, the text was published about 20 years ago, but the underlying principle is more relevant than ever. The shift from teaching to learning, of course, also goes along with a shift of focus from the teacher to the learner. We can look at educational processes from two perspectives. When I approach teaching and learning from a teacher-centered perspective, as a teacher, I would ask myself, how do I transfer my knowledge to my students? On the basis of this approach, courses, modules, and study programs are described in terms of content. When I approach teaching and learning from a student-centered perspective, as a teacher, I would ask myself, what do I want my students to be able to do after they have completed my course, my module, or my study program? On the basis of this approach, courses, modules, and study programs would be described in terms of intended learning outcomes. You will get to know everything about intended learning outcomes in one of the next videos. So, the underlying assumption of a teacher-centered perspective is, as a teacher, I can open the head of my student and pour my knowledge through a funnel directly into his or her brain, and I assume that teaching is merely knowledge transfer and that he or she will learn. Whereas when I look at teaching and learning processes from a more student-centered position, I assume that the knowledge has to be actively constructed in the learner, him or herself. And here we are. This is the difference between instruction and construction. Under the instruction paradigm, the learning process is the result of instruction by the teacher. Under the construction paradigm, the learning process is the result of active construction of the student. While under the instruction paradigm, the teacher acts as an instructor who provides expert knowledge and facts, he or she rather acts like a mentor who designs the learning environment and guides the learning processes under the construction paradigm. Classes that take place on the basis of the instruction paradigm have a tendency to be characterized by relationships that are based on steep hierarchies and only truths, where the only truth, of course, is the truth of the teacher. On the other hand, classes that are carried out on the basis of the construction paradigm are rather characterized by flat hierarchies and the exchange of different opinions and views. Under the instruction paradigm, it is assumed that learning was linear and cumulative, meaning we assume that our students learn one piece of knowledge after the other. Here we take for granted that our students definitely learn the first piece of knowledge after we have first presented it to him or her, and that we can go on with a second piece of knowledge because we assume that he or she would have learned the first piece of knowledge. Under the construction paradigm, we understand that learning is nesting and nonlinear, and that learners learn by interacting frameworks, and that they might learn the fourth piece of information before the first. Finally, under the instruction paradigm, there is a tendency to see learning as competitive and individualistic. In the class, you might probably find a lot of chalk and talk, which means the teacher stands in front on the board and holds a monologue, whereas under the construction paradigm, learning more often is a group event. You will most probably find a variety of learning methods like discussions of students in groups and pairs, peer teaching, project-based learning, etc. The shift from teaching to learning, from teacher-centeredness to student-centeredness, and from instruction to construction, which go hand in hand with each other, very much affects the role of teachers and learners. The learning paradigm ends the lecturer's privilege to be the only one knowledgeable the only one active in class, and the mastermind on top of the class hierarchy. Under this paradigm, teachers are no longer the essential feature of the instructional delivery system. Under the learning paradigm, teachers are regarded as being designers of the learning environments. They develop and apply the best methods for producing learning and student success. This relieves teachers from the sole responsibility for student success. Under the learning paradigm, the assumption is that learners have much more responsibility for their learning achievements themselves, which is clear because we assume that they have to construct their knowledge themselves and actively. In addition, teaching methods like group work, problem-based learning, peer teaching, etc. include an active contribution of the students to their own learning process. So the shift from teaching to learning also involves rethinking the roles of teachers and learning. This, of course, generally is a more sensitive topic in societies which are a little bit more hierarchical. And in particular, it might be a challenge for more traditional teachers who have a very clear-cut perception of themselves as instructors. The shift from teaching to learning also brings about another question. The transition from a more teacher-centered education can only be successful if students, A, can be trusted to be interested in taking part in their own learning processes. We know that there are students out there who do not seem to have an interest in shaping their own learning processes. Second, if the shift from teaching to learning can also be successful if the students are equipped with the skills to shape their own learning processes. And this involves a certain previous socialization and an amount of critical thinking skills of the students. A little digression to the European context. In the European higher education area, the shift from teaching to learning has become part of the Bologna process by the so-called Berlin Communiqué, where it says, ministers encourage the member states to elaborate a framework of comparable and compatible qualifications for their higher education systems, which should seek to describe qualifications in terms of workload, level, learning outcomes, competencies, and profile. They also undertake elaborate and overarching framework of qualifications for the European higher education area. Internationally, we can see this development from teaching focus to learning focus. In the Bologna process, there are 4 elements that should improve the efficiency and effectiveness of higher education: the learning outcome orientation, qualification frameworks, the European credit transfer system, and the diploma supplement. I will not go too much into detail here, but I would like to speak a little bit more on the learning outcomes. Along with the shift from teaching to learning, also comes a focus on the expected learning outcomes of an educational process. As I said before, under the learning paradigm, we no longer ask, how can a teacher transfer her or his knowledge to the student? But we ask ourselves, what should the student be able to do after he or she has finished my course? As a preview for the video on learning outcomes, I finally brought some definitions of learning outcomes. For example, learning outcomes are statements of what a learner is expected to know, to understand, and or to be able to demonstrate after completion of a process of learning. Learning outcomes are statements of what is expected that the student will be able to do as a result of the learning activity. And a learning outcome is a written statement of what the successful student or learner is expected to be able to do in the end of the module, course unit, or unit of qualification. And learning outcomes can be defined on the level of study programs, modules, and courses. We will deal more with learning outcomes, how to formulate them, and so on and so forth in the respective video. And I would like to recommend these 2 books or articles from which I also cited to read if you would like to go into more detail on learning outcomes. And for our online discussion, I would like to invite you to think about the following question. Does the shift from teaching to learning imply the abolition of lectures, hierarchies in class, and individual work of students? If you think so, why do you think so? If you do not think so, please also argument why you don't think that the shift from teaching to learning goes along with the abolition of these three elements. And please write down your opinions in the comments below this video so that we can start an active discussion on these questions. Thank you very much for watching. I would very much appreciate your active contribution to the online discussion so that we can exchange our experiences and opinions. See you in the next video. Goodbye.